with grief can be a daunting task, leaving us to feel afraid and even lost. Our next guest dives into the journey of grief and helps us process those difficult times. So please welcome Jennifer Cormier to the studio. Hi, Jennifer. How are you?
Hi there, Kelly. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. How did you get into this whole line of grief work?
You know, I got into the line of grief work really through a personal story. My dad was diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer when he was 57 and went through a whole healing journey with cancer. He ended up dying. I was hoping he would have a miraculous turnaround. And after his death, I thought I had done all of this anticipatory grief because it was a terminal illness, but I was not prepared for the absolute heaviness that I felt after my dad died. So I really went on a year-long conscious healing journey with grief. And that was a very powerful year for me. And it really did some unexpected healing on a lot of levels and opened up my life so that I could drive cross country and have a child. And I ended up finding myself about 10 years later, really holding space for other people that have moved through major loss. So I thank my dad for opening this door into grief work for me.
So there was nothing beforehand, what you were doing before your dad had died, that got you into this work?
Well, before my dad had died, I was doing a compilation of things. Artistically, I was a performing artist, a visual artist, a somatic healer. I worked with Pilates therapeutics, yoga therapy. So I was helping people move through pain, both physical pain and emotional pain, mostly working one-on-one with folks. And that work I weave into my grief work now. So I really bring in the whole person. It's a real holistic approach to grief. Many bereavement groups really stick to sort of behavioral cognitive therapy. And my work is really embodied. I think it's really important for us to be a whole person and bring our body into our grief work, because really a lot of our emotional blockages get held in the physical body. So it's really important to bring breath and movement and sound into our healing work with grief. So I do bring all of that. You know, I have a couple of decades of experience doing that work, and I do weave that into my grief work. That's an essential part of what I do.
It sounds like creativity is definitely a part of that whole process, correct?
Yeah. And what I notice, you know, if folks that are listening have gone through a major loss recently, often what happens if there's especially a death of someone who you're very close to, a partner, a parent, a child, a best friend, often feels like there's this void, right? Or there's this heaviness, this emptiness. And it's natural to want to sequester yourself or to not do a lot. And what I notice that the grief journey is a real opportunity to move through different energies. And as we move through them, there's an opening, and a lot of creative life force comes through the grieving experience. And I have clients who have decided to write one-woman shows, to write books. They're dancing, they're buying new houses and renovating them. And there's all this creativity that comes when we actually face our grief and move through it. We think that we might sort of dissolve into this black hole if we really feel what's there for us, but the opposite happens. Actually, life really opens up for us.
Well, you mentioned earlier that it took you about a year after your dad had died.
Yeah.
What is the typical grieving process, or is there a typical timeline?
Yeah, there's really no typical timeline. And I want to let people know that however you're moving through your process is okay. And whatever time it takes for you is the time it takes. That being said, there are some different traditional ways to hold grief in different cultures that, a year is a real marker, right? Because you've gone through every season, every holiday, every milestone, every birthday, right? And it's, the first Father's Day or the first birthday or the first, right? So you've at least gone through one cycle of firsts. So I like to say it takes at least a year. Sometimes it takes a couple of years. And for me, grief, now how I see grief is it never really ends, that's no longer the goal is, oh, when am I going to get over this grief and through this grief? And I want it to be done with. Now I see my life as just a weaving of, things come into my life, I celebrate, and then things leave my life and I grieve. So there's always a grieving and a celebrating, right? A welcoming and a letting go. And if I do that on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, then I'm more prepared for those big losses. So now I see grief as just something that is an integral part of my life. And I'm never going to get over grieving, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So grieving doesn't have to be just the loss of a person. It can be something, like you said, that goes in and out of your life. So how you handle grieving and your therapy, how is it different from like other bereavement groups?
Yeah, I think that how I approach grief is very holistic and brings in not only the physical body, not just the cognitive storytelling, which is really important, right? To be able to tell your story and retell your story. But it brings in the spirit and the soul and whatever that means for each person. Everyone's coming in with a different, maybe religious background, maybe they're atheists, maybe they've got a really unique flavor of spirituality, but it's really important to honor all of those layers of self in the journey of grief. So I think that I'm different because I really value all of those layers, and also community is really important. I think that some people feel like, gosh, I've got to do this alone, right? I've got to get through this, pull myself up by my own bootstraps and, get on with my life. But really, there's so much healing when we can start softening and opening up to those people and those energies that want to connect with us. So to really use the pain after a loss as an opportunity to begin to connect more deeply as opposed to isolate, right?
Right. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said so many people after a death or a loss, they decide to go inward as opposed to looking further and growing and accepting. And this is something that you do so well. How can folks find more information about you and what you talk about?
Yeah, they can find me a few ways. I am a host of a podcast. You can find the podcast on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts. And that's called Walk Through Grief with Grace. I did a lot of walking in nature. That was one way that I connected. When I talk about connecting, I mean connecting with other humans, but also, I noticed that when we isolate, if we want to be alone, if we go out and find our way into nature and start walking, at the ocean, in the woods, that's a way to connect with something greater than ourselves, even if we don't really want to be in conversation with other humans, right? So that's how I came up with the podcast title, Walk Through Grief with Grace, because I did a lot of walking in nature with my grief. So you can find me that way. I also have a private online community called Grief and Grace, and that's a Facebook group. So you can find me if you are active on Facebook. You can join the Grief and Grace Facebook group, and also I have right now a free gift that's a grief guide some really simple ways to move through your grief on my website. And the website is the same name as the podcast, walkthroughgriefwithgrace.com.
Jen, really appreciate you sharing your time today with us. We appreciate everything you've had to say, and hopefully folks will look you up.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun speaking with you, Kelli. Thank you.
And we'll be right back.